They were trapped on a drifting ice floe just a few meters from land, but how could one man and a pack of dogs possibly make it across? As the ice drifted farther from shore, Sepp decided to place all his hopes on the lead dog. He secured one end of a rope to the ice and tied the other end around Togo, the lead dog, then held him tightly, whispered an apology, and hurled him forward with all his strength, relying on Togo alone to pull the entire ice floe. The moment Togo hit the ground, he began crawling forward with great difficulty, facing a task that seemed utterly impossible, yet charging ahead without hesitation. The rope pulled taut, his companions cheered him on, and with his teeth clenched and every muscle straining, Togo pushed forward, completely forgetting that at 12 years old he was no longer young. After countless desperate charges, the massive ice floe finally began to move. Seeing this, Sepp quickly untied the rope, and with a single command, the dogs who had been brimming with energy surged forward with all their might. One by one, they leapt successfully onto the shore, and after a final burst of speed, Sepp himself vaulted onto solid ground. Once ashore, he threw his arms around Togo, overwhelmed with emotion, not knowing how he could ever thank his old companion. After all, 12 years earlier he had tried many times to abandon him. He still remembered the first time they met, when Togo was just a tiny pup crying for milk, frail and scrawny, a sight Sepp had no fondness for. In his eyes, it was simply the law of nature at work. Alaska's bitter cold of more than 30 degrees below zero was merciless to the weak, and even if this little one managed to survive, what could he possibly contribute to the pack? His wife answered that what kept Togo alive was the will to survive, and only because of her constant insistence was Togo never abandoned. In time, not only did he survive, but he grew full of boundless energy, so much so that it became a headache for Sepp, as Togo ran wild, chewed on everything and ignored commands. In a fit of anger, Sepp gave him away to a friend, but within 3 days Togo was sent right back. Left with no choice, Sepp locked him in the dog pen, yet the moment he saw Sepp heading out to train, Togo began digging furiously, and soon the other dogs copied his behavior. Furious at the chaos, Sepp dragged over huge stones and stacked them tightly around the pen to keep them contained. Sure enough, Togo quickly discovered the stones while digging, but if one spot didn't work, he simply moved to another. After trying 6 different holes along the fence with no success, he shifted to digging farther away from the wire mesh, and before long, his furry head popped out from the other side. Following Sepp's scent, he bolted straight ahead and soon caught up with the training team. Whether it was natural leadership or sheer mischief, every sled dog in training seemed to obey his direction, and because Togo had never been properly trained, the result was total chaos. Before long, he had led the entire sled team straight into the river, leaving Sepp drenched and furious. As soon as they got home, Sepp sealed every exit of the storage shed and locked Togo inside. Faced with a tightly sealed shed, Togo at first had no way out and ran in frantic circles. But once he calmed down, he carefully examined his surroundings and noticed a hole in the roof just big enough to squeeze through. Without hesitation, he set to work, and with his nimble body he quickly climbed up to the rooftop. Soon after, the sound of scraping and clattering echoed, and a little head poked out from inside. Seeing the adorable troublemaker, Sepp's wife couldn't help but look at him with affection. And so, Togo once again pulled off a successful escape and, just as excited as before, dashed straight toward his master's training ground, where he promptly threw the entire sled team into chaos again. Finally, unable to tolerate it any longer, Sepp decided to send Togo away to a town several dozen kilometers away. Although his wife was reluctant, she could do nothing against her husband's firm decision, and before long they arrived at a wealthy lady's home. Before leaving, Sepp warned her that the dog was mischievous, but the lady, already charmed by Togo, said she didn't mind at all. Helpless, his wife hardened her heart and left Togo there alone. The house was beautiful, but Togo didn't like it one bit. He ran frantically through the rooms, desperately searching for an exit, wanting only to return to Sepp's side. The lady believed that if she kept him confined for a few days, he would eventually accept his fate quietly, but in the end, she greatly underestimated Togo's stubborn spirit. After discovering the only weak spot in the room, Togo slowly backed up a few steps, and by the time the lady realized something was wrong, it was already too late. Not long after, while Sepp was training, he sensed something unusual, and when he looked up, there was Togo standing proudly above him, staring down with triumph. What Sepp couldn't understand was how Togo had managed to cross dozens of kilometers just to find him. Seeing the blood trickling from Togo's body, Sepp's heart softened and he considered bringing him home. He tried to lift Togo onto the sled to let him rest, but the little one refused to lie down and instead walked straight to the lead dog's position. Wanting to make him understand his place, Sepp tied him beside the fiercest dog on the team. Seeing the other dog's fierce demeanor, Togo, ever adaptable, immediately showed his talent for winning others over and quickly licked the aggressive dog into a state of comfort. With that, the sled team set off, and along the way Sepp was astonished to notice that Togo's speed and stamina far surpassed the dogs in his row. Suppressing his excitement, Sepp moved Togo up one row and tied another dog in front of him, but unlike Togo, this one wasn't so good at smoothing things over. Faced with the intimidating dog, it could only shrink back in fear. As they set off again, Sepp's excitement was impossible to hide, for he realized that Togo was more than capable even in this new position. So he moved him up another row and then another, until by the time the sled team returned home, his wife looked up and saw Togo standing firmly at the lead dog's spot. The dogs behind him were all larger in size, yet not one showed defiance, for Togo had earned his place through sheer ability. His wife's heart swelled with relief, while Sepp was utterly overwhelmed with joy. Beaming with excitement, he told her that Togo was not just a sled dog but a born leader. It was then that Sepp finally gave him the name Togo, after a Japanese admiral who, like the dog, had been doubted at the start but proved himself through undeniable strength. Although Sepp had begun to grow fond of Togo, in his mind dogs were still just dogs, tools for humans and absolutely not allowed in bedrooms. From that point on, Togo officially became the lead dog, and even former champion teams paled in comparison before him. Living up to everyone's expectations, he repeatedly claimed first place in the sled team competitions held in the town. 12 years passed in the blink of an eye, and life seemed to remain peaceful until one day, a virus suddenly broke out in the town, infecting more than a dozen children, with 5 already tragically dead. The mayor immediately convened an emergency meeting to discuss how to respond. The disease could only be treated with a serum located 1,000 miles away, and if the optimal injection window was missed, the infected had no chance of survival. To make matters worse, Alaska was in the grip of a once-in-a-century blizzard, with air pressure dropping at an alarming rate, roads completely impassable, and planes unable to fly, casting the entire town under the shadow of death. With no other options, everyone had to rely on traditional transportation, and all eyes turned to the town's most experienced musher, Sepp, and his lead dog, Togo. When the mayor asked Sepp how long a round trip would take, he bluntly replied that it wasn't a matter of time, but of whether they could make it back alive, so he could not promise to undertake the journey outright. On the way home, Sepp passed by the town hospital and, seeing the children he had watched grow up now facing life-threatening conditions, his heart ached. Back home, he thoughtfully applied wax to the sled boards. His wife sensed that he was again harboring a hidden intention, but she insisted that Sepp not take Togo, suggesting that one of the other dogs could serve as lead instead, since Togo was already 12 and might collapse and die from exhaustion on the journey. The thought that these could be Togo's final hours made her sad, but Sepp replied that in such terrible weather, if Togo didn't go with him, it would mean these would be the last few hours he could spend with her. Before she could finish speaking, there was a knock at the door. It was the mayor, paying a late-night visit. With no other means of transport available, Sepp, always the good-natured man, naturally accepted the risky mission. Before leaving, his wife spoke to Togo, saying, "You have to bring him back safely, and you must return to me in one piece too." Togo seemed to understand, nodding as if he grasped the meaning. To save time, Sepp set off early, and the townspeople rose at dawn to line the streets, sending off his team with eyes full of reverence and hope. Sepp knew this would be a race against nature itself or fate. As they approached the mountains, the wind and snow raged, and dense fog obscured their vision. Facing the unknown fury of the blizzard ahead, Sepp, fully equipped, led the sled team straight into it. To save time, he decided to cross over the towering mountain, and in the treacherous snow-covered terrain, He had to struggle alongside the sled team, climbing steep slopes with great effort. The storm proved far more intense than he had imagined, and just when they finally reached the top, the real challenge began. Sepp directed the sled team to move forward into the valley. But as they descended, the sled team began picking up speed uncontrollably, and Sepp, blinded by the wind and snow, could barely see the path ahead. Fortunately, Togo suddenly sensed the danger and stopped just before the sled team reached the cliff's edge. The other dogs, however, weren't as perceptive, and their momentum made it impossible to break in time. As the team teetered on the brink, Sepp made a split-second decision, leaping from the sled to drive his ice axe into the ground to anchor it. Despite the overwhelming speed threatening to throw him off before he could steady himself, at the last moment he successfully lodged the ice axe into the frozen ground, bringing the dogs to a halt less than a meter from the cliff. But the situation was still dire. Sepp shouted for Togo to run back, and Togo carefully turned and charged upward. Yet the other dogs, terrified, huddled together and refused to move, making it impossible for Togo alone to pull the entire sled team up. Fortunately, the dogs soon calmed down and began turning to climb upward. Through Togo's desperate effort, the sled was finally hauled to safety, and once they were out of danger, Sepp noticed that Togo's paws were injured. By nightfall, they reached a nearby station, where a woman quickly treated Togo's wounds. Before dawn the next day, they set off again. To save time, Sepp decided to cross the strait directly, cutting a full day off the journey so that the children would have a better chance of receiving the serum sooner, but the risk was immense, as he could have lost his life at any moment. Traveling across the endless ice plains, Sepp and the sled team cut through the storm like a sharp blade, charging forward. Soon, however, the still-thawing ice began to crack, and the occasional explosions of breaking ice startled even the experienced Sepp. The dogs in front, having never seen anything like it, were thrown into complete confusion and fear. Even the ever-determined Togo began looking back and around repeatedly, and Sepp realized that simply pressing forward wasn't enough, so he started encouraging them with words. Gradually, the dogs regained their confidence with each passionate command. At the same time, the local town newspaper sent a report to the Associated Press, and soon the American public learned what was happening in Alaska. With temperatures near -50°C and winds reaching 80 kilometers per hour, the storm worsened the epidemic, yet humans and dogs alike embarked on the grueling 1,000-kilometer round trip regardless of the danger. For this heroic race against life and death, everyone questioned not whether Sepp could retrieve the medicine in time, but whether they would make it back alive. While the media and public buzzed incessantly, Sepp's sled team had already successfully crossed the strait and entered another equally treacherous mountain range. Because Sepp's feat had made the newspapers, it sparked widespread attention, prompting the mayor to organize a sled relay. 14 relay teams were stationed along the route so that the sled team only needed to run short segments between stations, passing the sled to the next team. However, this plan required Sepp to meet the incoming relay sleds smoothly along the way. Sepp's wife, however, pointed out that her husband would inevitably take the risk of crossing the strait, which could cause him to completely miss the relay teams. Sepp, traveling unaware of this back home, was on the verge of being overcome by drowsiness and exhaustion after so many hours of continuous travel, relying solely on Togo to lead the team swiftly forward. Unexpectedly, they passed the relay team without realizing it, and by the time the relay team noticed, it was too late. They shouted after Sepp, but the roaring wind and snow, combined with his extreme fatigue, prevented him from noticing. Just when hope seemed lost, Sepp returned through the blizzard. Alert Togo had stopped to wait. In the freezing, snow-covered winter, the two embraced, and Sepp successfully obtained the life-saving serum. Togo, exhausted from pushing himself to keep up with his master's pace, had already been completely drained. Many of the relay team's sled dogs had been buried in Alaska's snowy mountains because of this mission, and everyone worried whether Togo still had the strength to complete the next leg. They wanted him to stay behind and rest, but Sepp refused. After a brief night of recovery, Sepp set out once more. Watching his back, the team admired him deeply, never expecting that Sepp would suddenly turn right, heading straight for the perilous strait. Determined to buy time for the town's children, he chose to risk crossing the strait again, despite temperatures plunging below -60 degrees Celsius and ice tens of centimeters thick underfoot. But the powerful winds caused the ice beneath their feet to crack constantly, making every step a life-or-death gamble. Soon, they found the path ahead completely blocked, and to make matters worse, Sepp's compass inexplicably stopped working, leaving only two possible directions. With no guidance, he had to rely entirely on Togo, the lead dog, to determine the way forward. In this critical moment, Togo turned and began chasing floating ice chunks, navigating the fractured, uneven surface. Ahead lay endless, broken ice flows, where a single misstep could send them plunging into the gaps. Under these conditions, Togo's judgment directly decided their survival. He had to be sharp, courageous, and constantly vigilant. Massive waves lifted the ice floes, and the slippery, tilted surfaces made it nearly impossible for them to stand. Sepp looked back to see a huge slab of ice toppling toward them as the waves crashed in, and he could only shout for the team to move quickly. Behind them, the ice continued to fracture under the force of the waves, yet the sound of cracking did not deter Togo. Courageously, he led the team through the chaos, navigating peril after peril with victory in sight. But then Togo stopped. This piece of ice was too far from shore. Seeing it was just one step away, Sepp decided to take a desperate risk, hurling Togo onto the shore and, relying solely on Togo, pulled the entire ice floe to safety, though it exhausted every last ounce of his strength. At one of the stops, the housewife gently stroked the sleeping Togo, tears streaming down her face, speaking in dialect that the dog was close to death. Sepp, puzzled, asked why she was crying, and the woman replied that it was just smoke irritating her eyes. After a brief night of rest, they prepared to continue the journey home. Before leaving, the homeowner suddenly called Sepp over and led him to the strait he had crossed the previous day. The ice was now completely gone, leaving Sepp shivering at the memory of the danger. Only 32 kilometers remained, and Sepp, not wanting Togo to exhaust himself further, tried to have him ride on the sled. But no matter how he persuaded him, Togo resolutely returned to the lead position, his place, his pride, from life to death. Reluctantly, Sepp tied him securely with a rope. As they passed through a forest, the weather grew increasingly severe, with blizzard conditions reducing visibility to almost nothing. Sepp could hardly see anything and could only once again rely on Togo, saying, "From here on, it's up to you. Take us to the next station, I know you can do it." The snow fell heavier and the darkness deepened, and eventually Sepp, overcome with exhaustion, fell into a deep sleep on the sled, entrusting his life and trust entirely to Togo. After an unknown amount of time, Sepp awoke to find the sled stopped and all the dogs lying motionless on the ground. Realizing the danger, he hurried to Togo, who was already collapsed from exhaustion. Sepp begged him to hold on just a little longer, saying, "We'll make it soon. If we stay here, we'll all die." But Togo was utterly spent. No matter how Sepp pleaded, he didn't even have the strength to open his eyes. Just as Sepp was on the verge of despair, a faint light appeared from behind. It was a station worker. Togo had led the team all the way to the station's doorstep before collapsing. True to what Sepp's wife had said, Togo had carried the team with the very will to survive he inspired in his companions. The next day, a sled carrying the serum raced toward the town. Reporters, long waiting for a scoop, swarmed the final relay team and, in their coverage, portrayed Balto as the hero of the relay. Soon, Balto's name spread across the United States, and a statue was erected in his honor in New York's Central Park. Thanks to the timely delivery, the sick children regained their health and vitality. Several days of rest at the station allowed Sepp and his team to regain their strength. With the storm past and peace restored, the journey home remained neither short nor easy, so Sepp decided to walk back step by step with Togo and the rest of the team. Even adding the slightest burden to Togo would have been an unbearable torment for him. The rule that dogs could not enter the bedroom became a thing of the past. Sepp had completely transformed his view of sled dogs as mere tools, now seeing them as friends, companions, and even children. Though others were hailed as the town's saviors, everyone knew who the true hero was. The townspeople sent Sepp blessings and gifts, Yet his face remained etched with worry, his greatest concern undoubtedly being Togo's health. One of the young girls saved by the serum, seeing Togo weak and exhausted, tearfully asked if he was about to die. Though innocent, the question struck a painful nerve in Sepp, and he lost control of his emotions, bursting out the door. His wife tried to comfort him, saying, "She's just a child, she means no harm. Imagine if a neighbor lost their daughter or I lost my husband." Filled with guilt, Sepp replied, "It's all my fault for pushing Togo to the brink of death." At that moment, he still wasn't ready to accept the thought of losing Togo. Over time, life gradually returned to normal, and the injured Togo continued to cling to Sepp's side every day. But that day, Sepp intentionally distanced himself from Togo, needing to go to work with a new team that Togo could no longer accompany. Reluctantly, he left Togo at home and set off alone. Watching Sepp's departing back, Togo seemed to feel the same pain he had as a pup. Dragging his injured paw, he leapt to the door, and to the housewife's astonishment, twisted the doorknob. Just like when he was young, Togo successfully escaped again and, despite his injuries, limped desperately toward Sepp. Gradually, he seemed to forget the pain, his front paw recovering, and he became the fastest lead dog once more. Sepp sensed Togo's approach, and turning around, he saw the familiar scene of Togo running toward him, undaunted and unwavering, just as he had 12 years ago. Sepp had once believed Togo was born to pull sleds, but he now realized Togo was born for him. From that day on, Sepp retired from sled work. His wife had been right, Togo possessed a will to survive, and he had pulled through once more, unstoppable even by a once-in-a-century blizzard. In retirement, Togo gained a new role and over the next 2 years sired many offspring. While people across America praised Balto, sled enthusiasts around the world clamored for Togo's descendants. They were intelligent, resilient, and brave dogs, but most importantly, they had gentle temperaments and an extraordinary bond with humans. Togo passed away on a Thursday in December, while Sepp and his wife continued their work raising dogs. Though Togo was no longer there, Sepp could still see his figure in the mountains. At that moment, Sepp realized that a good dog may not be with you for your entire life, but it will spend its whole life being with you. Togo is a 2019 adventure drama filmed directed by Erickson Core and starring Willem Dafoe and Julianne Nicholson. The movie is based on the true events of 1925 in Nome, Alaska, when the town's serum supply was 1,085 kilometers away. 20 sled dog teams participated in the serum relay, with 19 teams averaging 50 kilometers, while Togo's team ran the most dangerous 425 kilometers. His story remained largely forgotten for 86 years until Time magazine in 2011 recognized Togo as the most heroic animal of all time. Born small and frail, even deemed unfit by Sepp to be a sled dog, this seemingly weak Siberian husky proved through 4 daring escapes from confinement that the dignity of life lies not in pedigree or size, but in an unyielding will to survive.